They say when a man dies, only two things matter: the enemies he leaves behind and the people he protected. Today, Jackson Reeves had increased both numbers. He stared down at the three fresh graves behind his ranch. The Colt. 45 inches, his hand still warm, 6 chambers empty. Blood caked on his weathered face like war paint. 3 men rode in here today with killing on their minds, he whispered to the desert wind. Not one rode out. Jackson turned toward his cabin where the woman with unhealed wounds slept. A woman who'd rather die fighting than go back to the man who'd caged and tortured her like an animal. A sound from the horizon made him stiffen. The unmistakable rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. More were coming. His hand tightened on his gun. Some debts could only be paid in blood. The sun rose hard and unforgiving over Peaceful Valley Ranch. Jackson had named it that as a cruel joke when he first settled this patch of Arizona territory in 1879. Nothing peaceful about scratching life from desert soil stained with Apache blood. Nothing peaceful about the memories that rode with him. Jackson had just poured his morning coffee when movement caught his eye. A woman collapsed at the edge of his property, blood trailing behind her like a macabre shadow on the sand. He approached cautiously. Winchester 1873 ready at his side, the lever-action rifle that had saved his life more times than he could count. 15 years of solitude had taught him that nothing good ever wandered out of the desert. The woman was barely conscious, dress torn and charred at the edges, feet bloodied raw from miles of walking, dark hair matted with blood and dust. When Jackson knelt beside her, she flinched violently, as if his shadow itself might hurt her. "Don't. Stop," she whispered, before consciousness slipped from her grasp. Jackson hesitated, jaw tightening. Taking in strays was a fool's game in this territory, especially strays with trouble nipping at their heels. He should leave her, let the desert decide. That's what the man he used to be would have done. But that man had died at Antietam. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing, skin burning with fever. Inside the cabin, he laid her on his bed, then gathered his supplies: Kentucky bourbon, catgut thread, silver needle, and clean rags. The battlefield medicine that had kept him alive would serve her now. He cleaned her wounds methodically, with the precision that came from having done it too many times. A deep gash across her shoulder needed stitching. Jackson poured bourbon over the needle, then over the wound. "This'll hurt, ma'am," he said, though she couldn't hear him. "But infection out here is a slower death than any man with a gun." His fingers worked with practiced efficiency, pulling the wound closed with neat stitches. When he finished, he wiped his bloodied hands on a rag and sat back in his chair, watching her breathe. Hours later, her eyes snapped open, pale green, wild with terror. Before Jackson could speak, she bolted upright, then crumpled with a cry of pain. "Easy now," Jackson said, keeping his distance. "You're safe here." The woman backed against the wall, eyes darting toward the door like a cornered animal. "Where am I? Who are you?" "Name's Jackson Reeves. This is my ranch. Found you half dead on my property." He kept his voice even, the same tone he'd used to calm a spooked Mustang. "What's your name, ma'am?" She hesitated, clutching the blanket around herself. "Catherine," she finally said. "Catherine Miller." "You running from something, Mrs. Miller?" Fear flashed across her face. She tried to stand, only to collapse again. "I need to go. They'll be coming." Jackson nodded. "Figured as much, but you won't get far, not in your condition." He poured a cup of water and set it within her reach, then stepped back. "Drink. Then we'll talk about who's chasing you and why." Night had fallen by the time Catherine's fever broke. Jackson sat by the window, watching the darkness, his Colt single-action Army revolver resting on his leg. He'd cleaned and oiled it methodically while keeping vigil, each click of the cylinder a familiar comfort. "You know how to use that?" Catherine asked, her voice stronger now. Jackson didn't look at her. "Yes, ma'am, I do." "Have you killed men before?" He turned then, studying her face. She wasn't asking out of fear, he realized. She wanted confirmation of something darker. "I have. he answered simply. More than I care to count. Catherine's hands twisted in the blanket. I killed my husband, she said, the words rushing out like water through a broken dam. Walter Miller. Jackson's eyebrow raised slightly. The cattle baron from Dry Creek? She nodded, tears filling her eyes. He kept me locked in the cellar 3 years. Said he was teaching me obedience. Her voice cracked. Last night, he came down drunk, belt in hand. I grabbed Rusty's scissors from beside a crate. I didn't mean to, but when he reached for me. You defended yourself, Jackson said flatly. The lantern broke. The house caught fire. I ran. Her eyes met his, defiant despite her tears. I'm not sorry he's dead. Does that make me evil? Jackson checked his revolver cylinder, spinning it slowly, each chamber loaded. The lamplight caught the polished steel, dancing like fire. No, ma'am, it doesn't. Some men earn what comes to them. His brother Thomas is the county judge. He'll have men looking for me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They won't want a trial. The law out here bends for men with money, Jackson confirmed, holstering his revolver. Get some rest, Mrs. Miller. Nothing's happening tonight. Why are you helping me? She asked suddenly. You don't know me. Jackson paused at the door. I'm not one to judge, but I know what it's like to be hunted. His eyes hardened, cold as a winter in Montana. And I knew Walter Miller, saw him whip a stable boy half to death for losing control of a horse. Man wasn't worth avenging. Catherine watched him carefully. You were someone else once, weren't you, before this ranch? A ghost of a smile crossed Jackson's face. We all were, Mrs. Miller. Sleep now. Tomorrow comes early. As he stepped outside to check the perimeter, Jackson felt something he hadn't in years, the weight of responsibility for another human being. It felt both foreign and familiar, like an old gun that still fit his hand. Dawn painted the desert in copper and gold. Jackson stood on his porch, watching Catherine attempt to handle his old Navy Colt. Her hands were steadier today, though she winced when the stitches pulled. Keep your wrist firm, he instructed. Anticipate the kick. She aimed at the can he'd set up, squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide. Again, he said. Catherine frowned. What's the point? I can barely stand. Point is, Mrs. Miller, if someone comes for you, I want you to have options. He adjusted her grip. Sometimes living means fighting. She fired again. This time, the can jumped off the fence post. Good, Jackson nodded. You're a quick study. Catherine lowered the gun. I was a schoolteacher before I married Walter. Books were my weapons. Books don't stop bullets. No, she agreed softly. I learned that lesson too late. Jackson was about to reply when he noticed dust on the horizon. He squinted against the morning sun, hand instinctively moving to his holster. Inside, now, 3 riders approached, moving with the confidence of men who knew their business. Jackson recognized the lead rider immediately. Roy Blackwood, hired gun and former comrade from their regiment in the Civil War. The same Roy Blackwood who'd ridden with him in Kansas afterward when Jackson had earned a reputation as a man who solved problems for the right price. Trouble? Catherine asked, her voice tight. Jackson handed her the Navy Colt. Stay inside, away from the windows. If things go south, there's a trap door under the rug. Root cellar. Hide there. I won't go underground again, she said fiercely. Their eyes locked. He saw something in her then, not just fear, but steel underneath it. She'd been broken, but was reforging herself from the pieces. Jackson nodded. Then be ready to shoot. Anyone comes through that door that ain't me, you put a bullet in them. He stepped onto the porch as the riders approached. Winchester held casually across his body. Roy halted his men 20 yards out. Jackson Reeves, Roy called, grinning beneath his mustache. Long time. Not long enough, Roy. What brings you to my property? Roy dismounted smoothly. Business? Old friend. Looking for a woman. Catherine Miller. Killed her husband. Set fire to their place. Sorry to disappoint you. I'm alone here. Roy's smile didn't reach his eyes. Now, see, that's where you're wrong. Tracked her path straight to your door. He gestured to one of his men, a wiry tracker with a pockmarked face. "Jimmy, here's part bloodhound. Says she's inside right now." Jackson didn't move. "What's Thomas Miller paying you, Roy?" $500 for the woman, dead or alive." Roy adjusted his gun belt. "Don't make this difficult, Jackson. I know you've got no love for civilization, but Miller's offering enough to set a man up proper. And what happens to her when you take her back?" Roy shrugged. "Not my concern. Judge says she gets a trial." "We both know that's a lie." "Step aside, Jackson, for old time's sake." Jackson sighed. "Can't do that, Roy." The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. "You willing to die for some murdering woman you just met?" Roy asked quietly. Jackson levered around into his Winchester. "Guess we'll find out." What happened next was a blur of gunfire and dust. Roy drew first, fast as ever. Jackson dropped to one knee, the Winchester barking in his hands. Roy's bullet tore through his shoulder, hot pain lancing down his arm, but Jackson's shot caught the tracker square in the chest. The third man fired wildly, bullets splintering wood around Jackson. Jackson's vision narrowed to pinpoints. He swung the Winchester toward the third gunman and fired twice. The man crumpled from his saddle like a marionette with cut strings. Roy circled, revolver blazing. Jackson felt fire tear through his side, dropped the rifle, and drew his Colt in one fluid motion. 2 shots cracked almost simultaneously. Roy staggered, red blooming across his chest. He looked almost surprised as he fell to his knees. Jackson approached cautiously, gun still trained on his former friend. "Damn," Roy coughed, blood staining his teeth. "Still fast." "Should have stayed away, Roy." "Thomas Miller." Roy gasped. "He won't stop." "More coming." "Whole damn posse, with Harlan." Jackson's blood ran cold at the mention of Harlan Taylor, Thomas Miller's foreman, a man known for his cruelty and skill with a knife. "Why'd you take this job? You knew who Walter Miller was." "Money's money," Roy whispered. Then, with a final rattling breath, "Always figured you'd be the one to kill me." As Roy's eyes glazed over, a gunshot rang out from the cabin. Jackson spun, heart pounding, to see Catherine at the door, smoke rising from her Navy Colt. Behind him, a fourth man Jackson hadn't noticed fell from the ridge, rifle tumbling from lifeless hands. "He was aiming at your back," she said, hand shaking but voice steady. Jackson nodded, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. "Good shot." "Is it over?" she asked. "No, ma'am," Jackson said grimly. "It's just beginning." "Hold still," Catherine ordered, pressing a hot iron to Jackson's wound. He grunted but didn't flinch. "Bullet's still in there." "Wouldn't be the first time," he said through gritted teeth. They dragged the bodies behind the house. Despite his injury, Jackson had insisted on digging proper graves. "No man should feed the vultures," he'd said, "no matter what he's done." Now, as Catherine worked to extract the bullet with a sterilized knife, she studied him. "You've lived a violent life." Jackson stared at the ceiling. "Yes. Yet you named this place Peaceful Valley." She found the bullet, extracted it with steady hands. "Why?" "Hope, maybe. Irony, more likely," he hissed as she began stitching the wound. "After the war, I had a talent that paid well, became what they call a shootist. Hired gun." Catherine's hands faltered momentarily. "Like those men today? Worse. I was good at it." His voice hardened. "Until I wasn't. Shot a man in front of his son. Boy couldn't have been more than 10. The look in his eyes. Jackson fell silent. "Conscience has a way of catching up. So you came here to hide." "To stop running," he corrected. "Different thing entirely." When she finished, Jackson sat up slowly, reaching for his shirt. "We need to prepare." Roy wasn't lying. "Thomas Miller will send more men." "We could leave," Catherine suggested. "Head to California." Jackson walked to the window, checking their defenses. "They'd catch us before we hit the territorial line." He began gathering supplies, ammunition, water, food, and loading them into saddlebags. Catherine watched him, confusion crossing her face. "What are you doing?" "Getting you ready." he said flatly. "You'll take my best horse at dawn. Head north to Prescott. I know people there who can help you. And you? I'll buy you time." Catherine stood, anger flashing in her eyes. "You're sending me away? After everything?" "I'm trying to keep you alive," Jackson snapped. "Miller will bring a small army. One man, even with a good rifle, can't stop them all." "Then we'll both go." Jackson shook his head. "They'd track us. Only way is to stand and fight, give them something to remember." He walked to a small shelf where a wooden cross hung, carved with intricate detail. He took it down, ran his thumb over the worn surface. "My mother's, only thing I have of hers." He placed it on the table beside his colt. Sometimes the road to salvation is found looking down a gun barrel. Catherine watched him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You're staying to die." Jackson didn't answer. Instead, he checked his ammunition, laying out boxes of cartridges methodically. "Why?" she demanded. "Why fight for me? You could give me up, save yourself." "Is that what you want?" "No," she whispered. "I want to stop being afraid. But I won't have your death on my conscience." Jackson looked at her then, really looked at her. "What do you want, Catherine Miller?" She straightened, something fierce coming into her eyes. "I want to fight. I've spent 3 years being afraid. I'm done with that." A slow smile spread across Jackson's weathered face. "Then we stand, together." He tossed the saddlebags aside. "Can you reload that Navy Colt while firing my Winchester? I'm a quick study, remember?" For the first time, she smiled. A small, fragile thing, but real. As night fell, they prepared the cabin. Jackson showed her how to create firing positions, angles of approach, defensive fallbacks. She absorbed it all, fear giving way to determination. "If I die," she said suddenly, "I want you to know I'm grateful." Jackson looked at her steadily. "No one's dying today except those who deserve it." They waited through the night, side by side, guns ready, two strangers bound by violence and something else, something neither could name yet. But in the silence between them, it grew stronger with each passing hour. Dawn came with the sound of approaching horses, many horses. Jackson peered through the window, counting at least 10 riders. At their head rode Thomas Miller himself, his black coat pristine, and beside him the hulking figure of Harlan Taylor, a man Jackson had once refused to ride with because he killed for pleasure, not money. "Last chance to run," Jackson said quietly to Catherine. She checked her revolver. "Not on your life." He nodded, something like pride in his eyes. 8 shots each before you reload. Make them count." The riders stopped 50 yards out. Thomas Miller's voice carried across the distance, cold as January frost. "Jackson Reeves, I know you're harboring a murderess. Send out Catherine Miller and you can walk away from this." Jackson stepped onto the porch, Winchester at the ready but pointed down. "Morning, Judge. Afraid Mrs. Miller isn't available to hang today." Miller's face darkened. "She killed my brother." "After he kept her locked in a cellar for 3 years?" Jackson replied calmly. "I'd have done the same." Miller turned to his men. "Burn them out." The first shots came in a hail of lead and splinters. Jackson dove back inside, returning fire from the window. Catherine positioned herself at the back, where 2 men were trying to circle around. 3 o'clock, Jackson called. She pivoted, fired twice. A cry of pain confirmed her aim. Minutes stretched into an hour. The air grew thick with gun smoke and the copper smell of blood. Jackson had taken a bullet to the leg but kept fighting. Catherine reloaded with blood-slick hands, never hesitating. Running low, Jackson grunted, down to his last few rounds. Then came the sound they dreaded, crackling flames. Someone had thrown a torch onto the roof. "Cellar," Jackson ordered. "Now." "I told you. It's our only chance." He grabbed her arm. "Trust me." As smoke filled the cabin, they retreated to the trap door. Catherine's eyes were wild with fear, but she followed him down into the darkness. Jackson pulled a lever, and a hidden tunnel door slid open. "Old mine shaft," he explained. "Previous owner was paranoid about Apache raids." They crawled through the narrow passage as fire consumed the cabin above. When they emerged 100 yards away, hidden by boulders, they watched Miller's men surround the burning structure. "They think we're still inside," Catherine whispered. Jackson checked his Colt, 2 bullets left. "One chance," he murmured. "See the man in black? That's Miller. If he falls, the others might scatter." "That's a 100-yard shot with a revolver," Catherine said incredulously. Jackson's eyes narrowed. "Like I said, one chance." He raised the Colt, steadied his breathing, and fired. The distance was impossible for most men, but Jackson Reeves hadn't earned his reputation by being most men. Thomas Miller clutched his chest, toppling from his horse. Confusion erupted among his men. Harlan Taylor spotted them, shouted, and charged forward. Catherine raised her Navy Colt and fired her last bullet. Taylor jerked, stumbled, but kept coming, knife drawn. "Run!" Jackson pushed her. "Go!" Instead, Catherine grabbed Jackson's rifle, swung it like a club. The butt connected with Taylor's jaw with a sickening crunch. He collapsed at their feet. The remaining men, seeing their leader dead and his enforcer down, retreated in disarray, leaving their wounded behind. Jackson stared at Catherine, breathing hard. "Thought I told you to run." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "I don't take orders well. That's what got me into trouble in the first place." For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Jackson began to laugh, a rusty sound, like a door long unopened. Catherine joined him, the release of tension overwhelming. As the sun rose higher, they surveyed what remained. A burning cabin, dead men, but something else too, something unexpected. A future. 1 year later, Peaceful Valley Ranch had transformed. A new cabin stood where the old one had burned, larger and sturdier. New fences enclosed a vegetable garden. A fresh painted sign hung at the entrance. Inside, Catherine, Kate now, cleaned her own revolver with practiced ease. "You're getting faster," Jackson observed, leaning against the doorframe. She holstered the gun smoothly. "Had a good teacher." Word had spread about what happened that day. Some called it murder, others justice. But no one came looking anymore, especially after the territorial governor, no friend to the Miller family's corrupt dealings, had pardoned Catherine following testimony from Walter Miller's former servants. "Mail's here," Jackson said, tossing a letter onto the table. Joe Two Feathers brought it from town. Kate opened it, read quickly. "My sister in Boston says I should come visit." She looked up at Jackson. "Says I should start over where nobody knows my past." Jackson nodded slowly. "Might be the sensible thing." "I've never been particularly sensible." She folded the letter carefully. "This is home now." Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under the afternoon sunday. Inside, the wooden cross hung above Jackson's gun belt, which gathered dust these days. Beside it sat a bundle of wildflowers Kate had placed there that morning. Jackson poured coffee for them both. "Never thought I'd find peace here." "Did you find peace?" He considered the question. "Found purpose. Maybe that's better." Kate touched the scar on her shoulder absently. "You know, Walter used to say a woman was worth only what a man decided she was worth." She met Jackson's eyes. "What do you think a person is worth, Jackson?" "What they're willing to stand for," he answered without hesitation. "What they're willing to protect." The silence between them was comfortable now, like an old friend. "A man can't choose what breaks him," Jackson said, looking out toward the horizon. "But he damn well can choose what he builds from it." Kate smiled. "And what did we build, Jackson?" He looked at their home, this place of second chances, of redemption earned through blood and courage. Something worth fighting for. In the distance, dust rose from approaching riders, but this time it was the sheriff, with news of a railroad coming through the valley. Progress and civilization edging closer, like it always did. Kate stood beside Jackson on the porch as they watched the riders approach. His hand found hers, callous palm against callous palm. For the first time in years, neither of them reached for their guns. Some battles were worth fighting, and some were worth ending. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and share it with a man in your life who needs to hear about the true value of courage. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. There are more stories waiting for you here at Quiet Ranch Tales. Tell me in the comments, if life gave you one more chance to start over, would you take it? And who would you stand beside when the bullets start flying?